No, I think so. Yeah. I do
I've got a few.
apologize.
It's no problem. It's no problem. Yeah, we are live and welcome everybody. Sorry to keep you waiting. This is Jerry's Take on China with the wonderful Anna Chen. And it is so nice to actually finally catch up with you. This is the first time you and I have actually gone face to face, although we've been
Yeah.
Twitter mates for quite a long time, haven't we?
Mm.
Mm.
2019, I think that would be.
Maybe 2020 for me. I came
Oh,
on. I came on in earnest. I came on in 2020 during the first of our lockdowns here. I was a little
yeah.
bored and I needed something to do, and Twitter looked like it might be entertaining. Turned
And
out it
here we
was
are.
more than
Well,
entertaining,
I do
consuming.
apologize. I do apologize for this. I'm a Safari user, and this app won't use Safari, and then Firefox foxed me anyway, and here we are on Chrome. So,
Yeah, well,
hello.
Chrome's working for us, and that's fantastic. So I wanted to introduce you, but I have a problem with introducing you because I don't know how to pigeonhole you. You're so many different things. You are a comedian, you are a playwright, you are a journalist, you are an advocate of free speech. You're so many different things. How do you pigeonhole yourself? How is it possible?
Well, I contain multitudes. I generally describe myself as a writer, broadcaster, um, poet, because
Mm.
that's my main creative
I
outlet.
was going to ask that. Poetry seems to be your driving passion, but we'll
It
come
is.
back to that. What else do you do?
Um, I did comedy for a while, and I found it. I just have such respect for people who do comedy. Um,
Mm.
I found it difficult because although I like humor, I think it's really important to have a sense of humor. The setup punch format just didn't suit the way I thought, and I realized when I got back into poetry. I mean, I've been writing poetry since I was at school.
Hmm.
I just found it was a better way. It's almost like a long form humor. You
Hmm.
don't have to just do the setups and then reverse it.
Here's a great comment. I'm going to do this tonight. I'm going to introduce what people say. First impressions, you look like a heavy rock star. Now,
Heavy.
no. Heavy rock being a Deep Purple, Black Sabbath type of heavy rock. If we're talking about the era that I grew up in, I think I'm a little older than you, but I do know that you were once involved with a rock star. Did you ever write any rock songs?
I've been in bands. I've been in bands since I was 14 with my cousin out
Hmm.
in Romford. He and his friends. There was a
Gosh.
barn out there that we used to go to, and and play. I was Bowie generation. I was a Bowie kiddie.
Mm.
And I think so. I missed the hippies, missed all that. Although very aware of it when I was little. Um, I think all that punk generation, because I was a very early punk. I was punk before we realised we were supposed to be called punks. And
Did
I
you have
think
safety pins stuck in your various
no,
different?
my clothes. I did in my clothes, but
Right.
no, I never did that. I always admired Vivienne Westwood's t-shirts. The
You actually knew Vivienne Westwood, right?
Yeah, I think if you were a bright kid in London and I was a Hackney kiddie, you know,
Yeah.
I'd get the number 22 bus up there, and I believe you lived up there for a while as well.
Lived in
And
Pimlico.
in Pimlico. Oh,
Yeah.
that was yeah. That was too posh. Unless you were going to Tate Britain, in which case
Yeah.
we'd go up
My
there.
my my part was not posh, I promise you.
So Chelsea, though, I mean,
Yeah.
you know Chelsea and Kings Road. Kings Road was amazing, and that was an absolute magnet. And Vivienne Westwood's shop, in particular, was a magnet. The Sex Pistols used to go there.
Mm.
Um, that's before we realised, well, before they were called Sex Pistols. But you'd walk in there, and it was like a different world. There'd be Jordan, the real Jordan. seated there. I think she was originally a vet, one more veterinary nurse.
Okay.
Vivian, I think, was attracted to the energy of, young kids who were around, and she just, if you were interested in her stuff, if she thought you were interesting, she'd spend time on you. So I always wanted a cat suit because I'd been brought up on Batman, the TV series, and also my main icon, one of my main influences was Anita Pallenberg in Barbarella. Hello, my pretty. And as soon as I heard that and saw her, it's like, that's who I wanted to be. That's who I wanted to look like. So
Wow.
Westwood ended up making me my first cat suit, and I loved it. I just felt it was like my carapace.
Is this how you became Madame Meow?
No. Madame Meow was a joke years later because of Madame Meow.
It's an enduring joke.
Sorry?
It's an enduring joke. It's been around. You've been Madame Meow for a long time. You're in The Guardian for quite a long time as Madame Meow.
No, I thought when I was writing for The Guardian,
We'll come back to that.
As some things make me shudder, when I think about that. But yeah. So Madame Meow. So when did I started? I started my blog in about 2007. So it was about that time that I adopted it. Before that, I was just me, and I took a show to Edinburgh in the 90s.
Didn't you do something with a sex doll there?
I did indeed, Jerry.
Would you like to tell the audience what you did?
Well, the show was called Susie Wrong, Human Canon. And the point was I wanted to reverse this idea of East Asian women, always being submissive, being the victim, being the object that things were done to. So I wanted to reverse it and turn it into canon. Instead of the projectile, you were the actual weapon, because there was a limited but very unpleasant set of stereotypes of Asian women, and it was very sexualized. We were obviously over sexualized because that's one way to keep a group subjugated, which is to exaggerate and debase their sexuality. So sort of halfway through the show, I would come on with my it was a tease, that was I going to put out ping pong balls or wasn't I? And that was something then that was very subversive, and it was transgressive and all that. So we got this sex doll and we stuffed it with K-pop, so it was basically solid, and we got a pump action ping pong ball gun, which we split it down the back and stuffed this thing into it. And when it got to the climactic point, will she, won't she, is she going to, isn't she, I'd machine gun the audience from the
ping pong balls
with the ping pong balls from the business.
So were you the Susie Wrong, or was the doll the Susie Wrong, or was that a different character?
Was an amalgam, really. It was all of those characters, because I just basically wanted to go through all the stereotypes and just shoot them down, just shoot them dead, which was what that was about, and reverse it. And the idea was, at the end, the human being emerges at the end that never gets seen. So it was interesting for its time. It was the mid-90s. And it was interesting for a while, but once I'd done that, I really wanted to move on, because it's like staring into the abyss, and after a while the abyss stares back at you. And I think getting stuck in negative stereotypes is can be a very destructive thing. And I was always fairly smart, and I realized this is not going to be me, and I went on to other things. Doing I did Imelda. That was about Imelda Marcos and her relationship with America. So that was interesting for a while. just exploring who I was supposed to be, because I never got an accurate reflection of who I was.
Mm.
It was all Juicy Lucy, Susie Wong. The only other women were, as I say, Madame Mao and Imelda Marcos. So I never knew whether to steal a handbag or start a revolution. But they were better options. There were better options than the other two. And from there, I just well, I'd been writing before that anyway, from when I was very, very young. So that was just one phase of my creativity. Then I got pulled into politics in the late 90s. I was very lucky because I'd never been pulled into far left politics, which I realised after a while was quite a. I think it's quite a destructive thing from what I learnt. I went
Mm.
into sort of bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and
Yeah,
enthusiastic.
I think it's not so much that it's destructive, but because you're part of it, it could destroy you. It's not that it is destructive.
It's no, it was awful. The racism that I've experienced, I have never experienced racism as badly as I have in the far left.
Oh,
And
really? That surprised
that
me.
discrimination has
Mm.
been like, wow, that has been something else. The lack of awareness of people is just incredible. One of the reasons I really wanted to look at the way what's happening with China now and the way China's being demonized is
Mm.
that seemed to, I was sort of aware of that quite early on, because that's like at a macro level. It's a macro of what was happening to me at the micro level, and it's extraordinary. If you want to sort of birth yourself as a human being, as a rounded human being, the resistance you got to that simple thing, just being a living, thinking, feeling person, examining the world, examining yourself, where you are in the world, the way
Mm.
everything works. There was just so much resistance. It was weird, and this really screwed me up at the beginning, which is what Susie Wrong was in part about. But I realized if you do anything better than the dominant group, you get this reaction that's quite extraordinary, that I wasn't expected when I was young, and I see it now. And it was obvious that China, the better China did, the more that the forces of reaction were going to come down really hard on it.
I was going to say this about you. You seem to be, and I've been back through some of your older blogs. Your blogs go back to, I think, before 2011. I think I went back to
2007.
2007. Okay, I didn't go back that far, but you were still, even then, you were very conscious that China was being demonized even then. And
Yeah.
I don't think anybody realized that. You're possibly the first, certainly in my opinion, of British and Australian media, which are the two medias I've grown up with. I can't remember anyone pointing this out to me before, but you were pointing it out 10, 12 more years ago. How did you come to, is it because you were part Chinese and you saw it was just an endemic racism, or is it because of
That
something
helps.
else?
That helps. But I, for me, the turning point was 2005, when George W. Bush stood in the wreckage of Iraq. Metaphorically, he was actually on the Vincennes, I think,
Yeah.
and he declared, at the end of the hostilities, the crushing of Iraq, he
Yeah.
suddenly declared that China was I can't remember if it was either systemic or strategic competitor. And I remember being really, really shocked, thinking, well, what on earth has China got to do with anything? Everything's going well. They're the factory of the world. They're making our stuff. And then I realized he'd actually said the same thing in 2000. Now, 2001 was a very interesting year for me, because I did three key bits of work doing press. I mean, basically, when the press recruited me in the late 90s, I thought, it took them 1.5 years to recruit me. But when I thought, well, in for a penny, in for a pound, I might as well leave it in a better state than I found it. And I thought, well, I can bring skills into the left. And the skills that I was thinking was that when I did my show, there was some very talented arts PRs who got me a whole load of press, and it's really weird to go from one minute, not being anywhere, and the next minute suddenly you're in the Times and all that. I thought it was really interesting. So on the left, I was saying, well, do you actually put out press releases? Because you lay on these demos, you lay on these rallies and things, but it seems that it's the same sort of small section of the British population every time. Do you ever go out wide? Oh, no, we don't do that. They're bourgeois press. They don't have anything to do with us. So I thought, aha, I can actually do something useful here. So that's how I started.
You built a bridge between the Morning Star and the Guardian.
I both of them just we might get onto that later, but so I did all this press for various things they did. Then in 2001, 3 very important things happened. In March 2001, we all woke up to this press suddenly accusing the UK Chinese of starting the foot and mouth disease outbreak, which was insane, because what happened was Tony Blair had absolutely lost control of the foot and mouth disease outbreak. There were pyres of burning cattle everywhere. You had farmers committing suicide. It was really awful. And then suddenly the finger was pointed at the Chinese. Well, how are we supposed to have done this? And apparently, it's they collected food from restaurants in Northumberland, and it was a farm pig swill. It's supposed to be pig swill. It's like, well, Chinese just use meat from the butchers like everyone else. And then the article started describing these suitcases of antelope hooves that were being smuggled in, and bushmeat. And I was thinking, I can't remember wildebeest wandering over the Serengeti of China. Surely something is wrong here. So we ended up having a demo, bringing Chinatown to a halt, and we had meetings with Nick Brown, who was the minister at the Ministry of Agriculture, Fisheries and Food. He was really embarrassed, and he kept saying, I'm not a racist. But somebody in Northumberland had briefed Valerie Elliott of the Times. I think she was a bit angry because she felt like she'd been set up. So that was something. So we managed with these demos, and I did the press for that. We managed to get an apology vindication off Nick Brown, and then it was like, oh, well, that seems to be that settled. Then I did the general election that summer, representing the Socialist Alliance, and the reason I was in this thing called the Socialist Alliance was we were worried that Tony Blair would be so right-wing, he would disappoint the Labour electorate to such a degree that people would start to move further right. They would start to look to the far right. And I thought that was an important enough issue it was worth putting in time to try and combat that. So I did the press for that. We did very well. John Curtis said that we'd put in the best performance in the post-war left. So then that was all relaxed and fine. And then suddenly 11th of September came. This was so important. You watch the 2 airplanes slam into the World Trade Towers, and the noises were that the Bush administration were going to start looking to attack Afghanistan and Iraq. And again, it's like, well, that doesn't make sense at all.
It still doesn't make sense.
Well, it makes sense if you think now what their long-term plan was. It was, and I think that the choice to attack Iraq was nothing to do with who was guilty of that or anything. So I did the press for that. But I realized so these 3 very important things that happened. It was a very steep learning curve for me in 2001. But one of the things I realized then, 2005, Bush says this thing about China being a competitor. And I look back and I thought, so he'd said it in 2000, then a few months after he'd called us, the Chinese or China, a competitor, a strategic competitor, he had Tony Blair had targeted the UK Chinese, which I didn't know if this was like a blood sacrifice to Bush to show that he was loyal, or they were flying a kite to test the Chinese here. It looked alarming. So really, I'd say from 2005, sorry, to a long way to get to this point, but that is the point where I thought something was going very wrong. And they were ticking off a line of boxes.
Mm-hmm.
Yugoslavia, Iraq, Afghanistan, Lebanon's in there, you know, all the countries, all the big bads. And at the end of that, I thought it's going to be Russia and China. And
Ultimately, it has to be those two countries. They are the only two major threats, real threats to America in
but
terms of their national security, their dominance.
but what's weird is China wasn't even a threat. If anything, you know, China has always tried to work with America, and I think there was much more affection for
Mm.
America than there was for the British, because the British obviously, you know, the colonialism, the open colonialism after the
Mm.
Korean War, well, during the Second World War, of course, there was this, you know, China, they were the good guys against Japanese fascism, helping America. Then everything went kaplooey again over Korea. And then they
Mhm.
seemed to get it back on track with Nixon, Kissinger. So it seemed to me that China was, you know, as long as they were useful and just being their factory,
Mm.
then that was great. But as soon as they started to break out of the role that had been imposed on them, it's, you know, they were just going to, well, somewhere was going to stop it.
Yeah,
And that's
it's
what's
pretty
been,
much the only problem America currently has that I know of, and it has many problems. The only one that is not blaming China for is the gun problem. That seems to be the only thing. I
I
mean,
bet they're
there was
working on it.
well, I mean, China has no guns. It doesn't export guns. I mean, I've actually been involved in the export business here, and the company I was working with was making prototypes, and we once tried to export something that was a gun shape, and the amount of trouble that took. We ended up having somebody carry it to Hong Kong to ship it from Hong Kong. And it cost the client, it was just a one off prototype of something. It was the shape of an AK 47. So we had to carry it, declare it through the customs as a toy, a gift, a replica, that kind of thing. And it wasn't getting shipped. It's extremely difficult to ship a firearm from China, very difficult indeed. So it's one thing they can't blame China for. But then they could blame China for the conditions which create the gun violence that they have, I guess. But then people would just laugh at that and say, well, you know, you've had 300 years of gun violence in your country. So yeah, as far as I'm aware, I mean, I've just been writing about the fentanyl problem,
Yeah,
and
very interesting.
how the wonderful BBC keep telling lies about this.
Oh,
The BBC is completely smearing. Their headlines tell lies. Their
oh,
stories put the truth, but they omit the important parts of the truth. Like just yesterday, Mexico could prove that China was smuggling fentanyl. The story was that there was some packages with traces of fentanyl in a container. That doesn't prove anything. Traces are nothing. So that's something I was working on today. It seems to be a regular thing. The BBC
but
are probably the best at it.
oh, it's awful. But it's one
Mm.
thing after another. It's one damn thing after another. And it's like, it's like a toddler with some severe, you know, problems. If you keep blaming the
Hmm.
other for what you're doing, I mean, you know, when this all kicked off really under Trump, when he was accusing um, China of cheating, and so he laid on these trade tariffs that, of course, the American people ended up paying. Even now, I thought, well, this doesn't make sense, because if you look at the in-country sales and services in China by companies like Microsoft, McDonald's, Nike, Apple, all of these companies, the profits, the vast profits that are being made by these companies, America actually ends up with a surplus. And at that time, it was something like $24 billion. So this didn't make sense at all. There were a few voices at that time in the Western press who were challenging that. But of course, since then there's been a combination of carrot and stick, which has got everybody on board. And in fact, the think tanks like SimSec have pointed out, if we want to have conflict with China, we have to get the taxpayers on board. And that's what's been happening solidly since Trump started this.
Yes, this manufacturing consent. I mean, the demonization started, and somebody made a comment a little while ago. The demonization started back in the 2000s. It started. You were one of the first to be vocal about that in your blogs, and you knew this was happening. You knew this was coming. And what I see, and I only became vocal on this 3 years ago. What I've seen happening is a massive ramp up. And somebody else has made the comment, there's 500 million in one bill, and there's $300 million in another bill. That's 800 million a year for negative press on China. Well, of course, that negative press people mistake this and say, well, the journalists are doing this. The journalists aren't. The academics are doing this. The think tanks are doing this. And the media are just reporting what they're churning out. The media are only reporting most of them are only reporting without doing any checks, of course. I've had many conversations about Xinjiang because I've been there. I've traveled through there several times. And, the fact is, the security there is quite high security, but there's a very good reason for that. There is no oppression or persecution going on. And anybody who travels there can see that. You don't have to be a journalist. You just have to go there and open your eyes, and you'll see there is no oppression or persecution.
But it is hybrid. It's a hybrid attack from every single corner, and they're not allowing a breather even because then
when they ease off Taiwan, they start on Hong Kong. They ease off that, and we even had Tibet happening in, and now Mongolia. They're taking away the Mongolian culture.
It's like, if China was this evil, what on earth were you doing trading with them all this time? Because suddenly it's like a tap that got turned on. And what's disappointed me is how people in the West have lacked the sophistication to be able to challenge this. What happened to our critical faculties?
That's exactly right.
In 2007, I started to make I made my first program for BBC Radio in 1999, a program about Yoko Ono. But in 2007, there was a wonderful producer, Mukti, who I started working with. And one of the things that I wanted to do, that I was very firm about, was that I felt it was the need to have an artistic engagement as well as an overt political one, and that was to humanize Chinese, because you have to remember that when do you ever see Chinese newsreaders? There are no Chinese in EastEnders, in soaps. You just do not see Chinese. Since Gok Wan, there has not been a household name. When you have that absence, and this is something I've been trying to, what I've been banging on about really, is you turn people into a blank canvas. And given that there is this template for the Yellow Peril that goes back, to the Opium Wars, to the mid 19th century, you create the monster, the possibility for the monster to be created, which of course is just a projection of the monsters that are going on in the imperial aggressors id. So I thought this was very important when I did a series of programs for BBC Radio 4, where I thought it was really vital that you start to familiarize yourself with Chinese. Chinese are real people. We are capable of love, of altruism, of caring about our fellow human being. All of
Yeah.
these things are completely left out. So what you have is this blind spot. You can literally now draw pictures for people and they don't see it. And the trick is to see it. It's a magician's trick that's being done on the mass population.
Yeah. I remember the song by Sting from about 30 years ago. It said, "The Russians love their children too." And it's the same. That really does apply to China very much so. And the amazing thing that gets me, you're Chinese, you must have heard this 1,000 times, 10,000 times. I love China. I love the Chinese people, but I hate the CCP.
Yeah.
And when did you go to China and what did you experience there is my first question. Of course, they've never been, because if they had, they would see that the CPC and the people are water and wine. They're mixed already. You're never going to stop this. You're never going to take this party out of the people, because the people and the party are pretty much the same thing. And I would say, I mean, it's been proven, more than 90% satisfaction rate, more than 90% happiness in China. These are not people walking around with this yoke of oppression, being kept down by an evil totalitarian regime. These are people who are getting a government that really looks after them, cares for them, and improves their lives. Now, that doesn't mean it's all perfect. There are some people who are not happy, but they're a very, very small minority. And when I've lived in Australia and I've lived in the UK, I know what an authoritarian regime looks like. I lived in Margaret Thatcher's UK. That was pretty totalitarian. And I was part of her army.
Well, look at Orgreave. I wrote about that whole Orgreave thing where they reported that the miners had attacked these police on horseback, and then when someone got hold of the raw footage, and it emerged that in fact the TV companies had reversed the order of the footage, so that it looked as if the miners had attacked these police on horseback, and in fact the police had done the attacking, and it was that brazen that they reversed it, and they're doing.
I wasn't at Orgreave. I was on the miners' strike, and I spent 13 weeks in the north of England. I was working in Essex at the time, as a matter of fact. I was going to talk to you about the Essex connection there, because I grew up in Wickford, which is not far from Romford, and I used to go to that. I think I probably went to that bar that you used to play in, the Barn.
The Barn. It was a barn in the barn. If you oh god.
You catch the 251 bus to get to it from Wickford.
Marksgate Estate. Do you know Marksgate Estate? And I think there's a roller rink, either an ice rink or roller rink there.
It was a roller rink,
Road out towards sort of South End, and then it's past Newbury Park. And this is all my stamping ground, because my relatives. Remember, my mum was white English, my dad was Chinese. But I look completely like my dad, and I've got his name. The only part of my mum I can see is here in the bridge of my nose. So I look completely Chinese. But I think this is why I'm in this weird position where I've been brought up being accepted, because, hanging out with my relatives and being brought up in Hackney, where everyone was mixed there, a lot of black people, a lot of Jewish people, Greek, there were some Poles. So racism, unless you're in the National Front, racism wasn't really a big thing there. So that's, so I've seen that. But going out to Romford. So I was born and raised in Hackney. And to go out to see the relatives in Chadwell Heath and Romford, you get the bus or go to Newbury Park and then get the bus from there. So out there, where was it? There was a big poster saying Bonza potatoes. And I think there was a poster saying toot and come in.
Toot and come in, yes. That was on the A127. Yeah, it was when the Tutankhamun thing was going on. Yeah, I remember that. I used to drive past there on the way into London.
So we did a lot of rehearsing there. I mean, we're like 14, 15, 16 there, but
Yeah.
that, that we just wanted to be in bands after that and
Right.
be creative.
Yeah, I remember the Tutankhamun was very, very cleverly done. Where did we come? We were going. So we were talking about the miners' strike. I spent 13 weeks in the north because at the time, I was a police officer in the UK. I was in London for the first 5 years of my service. Then I moved to Essex, and from Essex, I went on the miners' strike. When I was in London, I had an entirely different story, but in Essex, it was just normal, proper policing and very little excitement, to be honest, except for the miners' strike. So for 13 weeks, I was traveling up and down. You spend a week there and then come back for a week and then spend another week there. And that was how it went. And I was involved in some altercations, but I never got into the nasty ones. For 90% of the time, we got on great with the miners. We
You
played
weren't in the
football with
Met.
them.
You
Sorry?
weren't in the Met. You weren't in the Met.
I was in the Met from 77 to 82, and then I left the Met and went to Essex. I spent 10 years in the police overall, but 5 years in each service. I was in the Met. That's why I lived in Pimlico. I lived actually on the corner of Ebury Street, just behind the bus station. Yeah, the block of flats there is a police flat, police accommodation.
Our
That's why I
stamping
lived.
ground.
Yeah. I worked just around the corner for my first couple of years in a little tiny police station called Gerald Road, which is no longer there. It's been relocated to Victoria now, Victoria Police Station, which is also in Pimlico, but just somewhere at the end of Buckingham Palace Road.
Well, when you were a kid in Hackney, it was like that's up the other end of the universe.
That's what I said in the description. You've moved from the East End to the West End, pretty much, haven't you?
Yeah, sort of.
Sort
the thing is, I didn't appreciate Hackney when I was a kid. I thought it was boring. I wanted to do lots of creative things, and there really wasn't much going on in Hackney apart from Centerprise. When they opened up Centerprise in Dalston Lane opposite the Dalston police station. In fact, Jerry, how our worlds crossed.
I've probably been to Dalston police station, but I don't remember.
It was famous because apparently that's where a lot of the dope that was on the streets, the cannabis resin, was coming out of the back of it, and people knew because it would be covered in fingerprint dust. So I hear. I was only a kid. I wasn't doing it, but that's one of the things we knew about Dalston police station.
Yeah.
Since closed.
Okay.
I
do know someone who served there. One of my classmates coming out of the training school went there, and Simon Weigold. We stayed in touch for a couple of years, but then I lost touch, and then 82. Middle of 82, I moved out of the Met and off to Essex. Because although I was born in the northeast of England, I'm actually a Geordie by birth, or really a Mackem technically. I was born in Sunderland. I grew up in South Shields in a mining town, and my grandfather was a miner. So my loyalties when I was working on the miners' strike were quite divided. It was quite a conflicting time, and probably contributed to my desire to get out. I'd be fairly certain in saying we had a lot of reasons. I was married to an Australian at the time as well, which kind of encourages you to go that way. But the miners' strike and the conflict, I earned a lot of money and it was great. We did earn a lot of money as police officers during that, lots of overtime. But the problem was the conflict, and I wasn't doing what I thought was a police officer's job.
But also, I think my understanding at the time was that it was the Met that the miners really didn't like, because to begin with, the local coppers, because they were quite often from the same communities, were more, I think, very torn, and they had to actually get the Metropolitan Police to go in to take over to displace those coppers, and they were getting.
Yeah, it wasn't just the Met. I was in Essex at the time, and we were there. We were sent up a lot. Pretty much every force, every service. They called them forces in those days, the police force. Now they're police services because it's a nicer word, of course. But Greater Manchester were a big problem. I remember, because they're tough guys, and we had some really tough guys coming in. The Met in my time, the Met was pretty. I mean, you had the bad apples, but it was a very straight. I was 10 years in the police, and I never encountered any form of corruption. Now, you could say that I'm very naive and I didn't see it, but it just wasn't there. You would know if something was going on if your mates were on the take and they didn't include you in it. You'd probably learn about it. I never encountered it. I did encounter a few people who did some wrong things. I met some aggressive police officers, but generally speaking, 90% of them are just guys doing their job, and
But it's
most of
worse
us
now.
wanted to do it.
But it's got worse
Now,
now, hasn't it?
yeah, I think so.
The
Yeah.
these cases that there seems to be a lot of hatred of women.
Yeah, I haven't watched the coronation, yesterday's coronation. We should talk about that, but I haven't. Hang on. This is a comment I have to come up with, because the SPG was the Met, and they did get banned. The SPG got banned after a guy. He was a New Zealander, and his name was Blair Peach, I think was his name.
Oh yes, famously,
got
yeah.
truncheoned to death by the SPG, hit on the head and died. It was obviously a terrible thing. They said he was an innocent bystander. He was not an innocent bystander. He was a protester there. But that's neither here nor there. No one deserves to get bludgeoned. Yeah. But then the SPG got disbanded. And what they did, as soon as they disbanded the SPG, they reformed them into a different thing called the FSU, the Force Support Unit. So, yeah, the SPG didn't muck around, but then the Force Support Unit didn't either. And I was actually on the Force Support Unit for a while. That was an interesting time. We got the riot training and the special sort of extra training that you needed for civil disobedience events. So where were we going? Now, the Metropolitan Police, I was looking at the coronation just on Twitter and seeing that they have now started arresting people before they commit an offense. They're arresting people.
Minority Report.
When did this start? This is 1984 stuff.
This is
when did the British police ever arrest someone because they thought that person might create a disturbance?
I think Priti Patel watched Minority Report and thought, well, that's a good idea. Why don't we do that? So it's really Priti Patel, and followed by Braverman, have been
and Tom Cruise.
Yeah. They've been rushing these these bills out, and it's because I think they know the writing's on the wall. I think in America and in Britain they know everything's imploding. There is nothing to keep it going. We're no longer expanding, we're contracting. There's a tiny elite at the top, a shrinking elite that's basically taking everything that isn't nailed down. I mean, arresting people before they've even done anything. It was the rape whistles. Did you see that there was some
because they might scare the horses.
Yeah, so they're going and arresting people with, people can use whistles, any whistles. If people want to scare the horses, then there are any means that there are, firecrackers, anything. So I think that this is
There's a much better way to deal with horses. And the Metropolitan Police mounted person told me this, but I don't think I should put it over the air.
Ooh.
Much better way. Marbles.
I think the ruling class is getting it together, because they know at some point, the Brits, please, you're gonna wake up and realize what they're doing to us. And I think when that happens, I mean, look at the poll tax. We were pretty good around the poll tax, and we managed to stop that.
Yeah, isn't it interesting? Now, I want to just come in on that point, and I know I'm interrupting your thought process. I'm sorry. The process of democracy, where we used to have, occasionally we had riots and things, but 9 times out of 10, I went on these protest marches through London for various different reasons. Save the whales, save the planet. We used to just, every Saturday afternoon in the summer season, and we'd go through and 90%, probably 99% of protests were all peaceful. And that caused the government to change things. People protesting got listened to when they were there in big enough numbers. And
Mm.
the first event that I ever came across was the 2003, 2000, late 2002
Yeah.
anti-Iraq
Mm.
protests, where millions of people went out and protested
Yeah.
and got ignored.
Yeah.
What has happened since then? This is the change. The democratic process of peacefully protesting against a government decision has now been completely eradicated. And
Mm.
so there are only violent ways to go, alternate ways, not necessarily violent, but they're disruptive, they're alternate, and most of them end up violent. That's the only way that a peaceful protester of 10 years ago can now get their voices heard. And I think that's the problem that the world is facing. Start listening to the people, start making. This is why China never has violent protests now, because they listen to the people. They have this whole process democracy. And I mean, there'd be many of my viewers would agree with me, but there'd be many people who see this would say that's rubbish. It's not. China listens to the people. China
Mm.
doesn't need to have violent protests because someone will come out, listen to what they've got to say, and say, okay, we'll get on that and we'll get back to you. They'll give solutions.
Well, I
So
think
sorry.
Brits are starting to look to France. I mean, remember those Gilets jaunes protesters?
Yeah.
They've been doing that for a few years now, and I admire their spirit. But it's not. I'm not sure what they've achieved, but my God, they've got a lot more backbone than we have here. The lesson we had in Britain was that series of demos, and I did the press for those, the anti-Iraq war demos. One of the things that I worked on during that time was the BBC consistently underreporting how many demonstrators there were on the marches leading up to the big February demonstration in
Mm-hmm.
2003, because there were several leading up to that. And you knew that there were at least 50,000, possibly more, because I remember standing outside the National Gallery on those steps above Trafalgar Square. That was filling in. I don't know, what's the capacity of Trafalgar Square supposed to be? It's tens of thousands anyway.
It used to be when we used every New Year's Eve it used to be full of tens of thousands, but then they had an accident there and several people got crushed, and now there's fences and it's reduced the capacity. I
Well,
wouldn't
20
know the
years
answer.
ago, 20
Mm.
years, 20 years ago, I remember watching everyone coming into it, and very well behaved demonstrations of it was peaceful demonstration. Everyone coming in, and you'd look to the right and down Haymarket, they were still coming. It was huge, huge, huge. And the BBC reported 15,000 on the protest.
15.
15, 1 5, and this was obviously rubbish. And Richard Sambrook would say, "Oh well, that's what the police told us." So I was in contact and trying to say, "Look, this is ridiculous, because our demonstrations are getting far more than this." And his first reaction was to then say, was to then report 10,000. So it was a little bit of revenge. If you're going to
Mm.
complain, we'll take it down even more to 10,000. So that was ridiculous. So eventually I managed to get him on the back foot with sort of going through Greg Dyke. And he eventually he did write back to me saying, we should have taken your numbers on board. We're sorry, we've actually adjusted these numbers on our website.
Mhm.
So when the public goes on these demos, and these were, there were families there were pushchairs, and
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I
these
remember.
were great family occasions. When they see they're being ignored, that we're supposed to be in a democracy, I think people do get upset, and especially that huge one, which was about 1 million strong. Um,
Yeah,
the final one that,
the
in
February one. Mm.
in Hyde Park.
Well,
So
when
we
you
get
think about it, if 1 million people care enough to come out, that probably means a few more million care enough but don't have
yeah.
the time or couldn't be bothered or live too far away. But this is a huge number, and 1 million people come out. You can't just say, well, there's in the UK there's 50 million people. You can't say, well, 49 million didn't come out. You've got 1 million people out. That's a huge
Yeah.
number, and it was a huge number.
that's the
Mind
tip
you,
of the
they had
iceberg.
some good music on to come out for. I think they had a concert on at the end of it, didn't they?
Um, that's a sore point, actually.
What was it?
There were some hippies that put together a Peace Not War CD that had people like Pilger was on it, and they had lots of different musicians. The organisers decided they were not going to play that, and they thought it would. Their excuse was it would offend the fellow organisers. It would offend MAB. But one of these demos, the rallies, I turned up and they were playing Bob Dylan and his very Christian music.
Mm.
So it was like, I mean, the shenanigans and games that were going on behind the scenes, that's a completely different thing. But looking at whether we're a democracy or not, if peaceful demonstrations get nowhere, because that was in February, and then the vote in Parliament about whether we went to war or not, that was held, what was that, 18th of March, so a few weeks later.
Yeah, it was a few days. I thought it was days later, but yeah,
It was
quite close.
shortly after in March, and they just went ahead and voted for this, even though everyone had come out. And I think that affected a lot of people in how they saw the system. The system isn't working, and now, as I said, you've got Priti Patel and Braverman who have really rushed through a lot of this legislation, which of course gets voted through, which is incredibly repressive. The thing about the rape whistles, people being arrested because they might give out rape whistles, or when the Queen died, people holding up the blank pieces of paper. Do you remember that, in protest, which was then used by people in
the COVID. It's interesting how these things come about. Yeah, it was a COVID, the A4 protests, I think
Brits
they called
did that first.
Yeah. Well, you know who organized it in China. It certainly wasn't Chinese people.
No, I can
it's
imagine.
Interesting. You also talked about counting numbers in the BBC with their miscounting of numbers when it suits them, because there were millions of people marching in Hong Kong, and they weren't millions. There was a lot of people, but they weren't in the millions. Yeah. And that's another event where media has just said, well, look, we want to push Hong Kong, so there are millions there. We don't want to push the anti-war thing, so there were only tens of thousands there, or less than tens of thousands.
Well, remember that Patton, the last governor of Hong Kong, was also
Chris
the
Patton,
chair of the BBC Trust, and we've seen what's happened with Richard Sharp. So you've basically got the establishment.
And yes, the BBC is the establishment. Yeah,
they've cleaved off from the mass of the population that does the voting. So you vote once every 4 years, and then nothing happens. You've got the same people in charge. People promise this, they promise that. Starmer, all the promises he made when he was voted into the leadership of the Labour Party.
He's just come out and said he can't do this and he can't do that now. Yeah,
all of them, they've all collapsed. It's just crumbled into dust. So you're left with
at least, I don't approve of Starmer at all. I don't like the man at all. But at least he's had the guts to come out and say, we can't do what we said we were going to do. I have to give him some credit for that.
Well, that's because he's in a position where he can say that. What's anyone going to do about it now?
Because we don't have an election this year. Yeah, there is that. In America, they just make promises and they just don't bother. And there are all sorts of media sites that say, look, I looked at one the other day for Biden's top 100 campaign promises, and 25 of them have been done. 25 of his top 100. One has been completely shelved, and the rest are all stalled or pending, or it means they're not going to happen.
What about student debt forgiveness? Because that was the biggie.
That hasn't happened, and it was a promise. That was one of the ones. Yeah. But it hasn't not happened. He would argue that it has happened, but because they did something with student debt where they did cancel some, and then they did put a hold on some. But no, it hasn't. Medicare for all has never happened. Now, my understanding is these are two absolutely massive parts. If you go out and do a poll now, you'll get 80% of the people involved will say we want that changed. Democracy is not working. So if democracy is not working, what are they going to do? If I can't get my government to help me do something, I'm going to do something about that. If I don't like something, I want it changed.
And yet, when Harvard, or was it Pew, did the research in China to look at satisfaction with the government,
this is a good little point.
What is it, 95% or something?
It's 95.5% that had either very high or a high satisfaction rate. Now, in fairness, a lot of people say it was 95% satisfaction, and that technically is correct. When you have 5 boxes to choose from, 95.5% chose the top 2 boxes. So it was, or maybe it was the top 3 boxes, but certainly many more people are happier than not happy. Now, the other thing about China is that poll only measured central government. It didn't measure local government. And most people, if they have a problem in China, it's local. It's usually local. They can't get this particular problem. Most people don't care about the national stuff and the foreign policy stuff. They care about their kids going to school. They care about how the roads are getting maintained. They care about the day-to-day stuff that affects them. So yeah, that wasn't Pew. That was Harvard Ash. Pew have done one, and also just very recently there was one by Ipsos, which showed China as the happiest country in the world.
Without drugs.
Yeah, well, they had 32 countries measured, so they didn't check all the countries, but China had the highest happiness rate of the 32 countries they checked.
Well, do you know what? If I'd been living in China in 2020 and seeing how, well, after the initial Wuhan shutdown, and then looking around and seeing how America and Britain had dealt with COVID, I think whatever gripes I might have had before then, I think I also would have been very pleased with them, because those scenes of them opening up after the end of their lockdown, I mean, my heart was beating. It was like I was so excited for them. It was brilliant.
Yeah.
What did our government do? You do realise that when Boris Johnson was voted in to Downing Street, he got in June 2019. Do you know one of the first things that he did in July was he closed down the UK pandemic team? That's about the same time as Trump had closed down the Beijing office of the CDC, and he'd already closed down the Obama's pandemic team. That's very interesting. Do you know about that? What John Bolton did?
I don't know their reasoning behind it, but it certainly seems they knew something we didn't.
I think
could it
so.
all be a coincidence? A cost-saving measure?
A what saving measure? Sorry.
Cost-saving measure. I mean, it could be coincidence. It seems like I don't believe in coincidences this great. When Johnson and Trump do the same thing, they've talked about doing it
at the
same time. Yeah. So they're doing the same thing at the same time, and it was 5 months before Wuhan. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
And it was, and then there's the 57-page memo issued by Pompeo allies, blame China, that they issued to all the state departments, and I dare say they're NATO allies. Probably would have got a copy of that, because the parallels were absolutely extraordinary. The super spreader events, we had Cheltenham. Trump had his super spreader rallies. The whole
he had lots of rallies
about it. I don't believe this is accidental. I mean, there's there's a narrative coming out now. I think that the Times did this. That's decrying Johnson, but saying, oh, he was an idiot. And I don't believe that they were idiots, that they did that, because there are too many parallels. And I think we need a proper inquiry King's
Who does
Council.
the inquiry?
Well, Mike Mansfield did
Mm-hmm.
a people's inquiry. Have you read that? Because
No.
I've been. That's really interesting. A lot of his timelines. I've got a 500-page timeline from 20, 2019. We had it, by the way, in November 2019.
Mm.
My friend had what I thought was a smoker's cough. It sounded like a smoker's cough. Oh, Charlie, that sounds bad. You've been smoking all these years. I've never heard you with a smoker's cough. He had that by mid-December. I had the same cough, but it was along with what I thought was my usual bronchitis.
Mm.
So we had different symptoms, but we had the same cough. Then my cat, my beloved, and I'm going to try. I have to try not to cry now. She
Okay.
developed the same cough, right?
Mm.
She's now dead, right? She
Mm.
got Hodgkin's, and of course we know now that COVID affects all the organs, and one of the things it does is affect your immune system. So it was around, and it's not just us. There are lots of people who say, "Yeah, I had something funny around that
Yeah.
time as well," but they won't look at it. They won't have a proper,
Yeah,
inquiry.
it was also found in sewage in Spain, sewage in Italy, sewage in France, sewage in Los Angeles. It was around. Where it came from, it could eventually transpire that it came from Wuhan. It could have started there. Who knows? But what really annoyed me when I read the headlines about they had found in Europe, they had found traces of COVID in sewage from 3 months before
Mm.
Wuhan discovered they had COVID. And the comments that came out on media was it it escaped China earlier than we thought. Rather
In
than
which
it was in
case,
Europe before China discovered it, it escaped China earlier than we thought. That's a very, very different point of view.
this is the conundrum they have, because we also know from the Red Cross blood samples taken across 9 states in America that they had 106 antigen positive samples in December 2019. And if you work backwards, that's not 106 cases. That's actual positives taken from these random samples. That means somebody worked it out, did the stats, and said that must have meant that the initial infection was August. Now, if it was the case, and they won't even look at they've stopped it at December. They won't look at the earlier Red Cross blood samples earlier than December 2019. If it was the case that it actually escaped from Wuhan earlier, it means by the time it was found in China, if it went out and then came back again, it would have been all over China. And it means that the animal, and also the animals, they've never found the animals either. So I believe, and the fact, 18th of October, what a date that was. Do you remember 18th of October 2019? Two things happened. One was Event 201, right, in
Okay, yeah. I
New
know about
York,
201.
where
Yeah.
they look, and to me, this was like Trump the showman putting on the show. So everybody there, including Guo, actually was a participant, but I think he was a patsy. The same day, 18th of October 2019, was the opening of the Wuhan Games.
Okay. I didn't know that.
Well, I think, as I said, I've got a 500-page timeline, and every time I slot something into it, I read around it, and it's like,
That makes sense. Yeah. We cycled through Hubei in October. Actually, we were coming back from Urumqi on bikes, and we cycled through Hubei and then down into across the river into Hunan and then into Guangdong. But there was a lot of evidence. We didn't have anything to do with the sports that were going on, but there was a lot of evidence that there was military games, military training going on at that time. So yeah, it was an interesting time because we were all just traveling through China normally, and
your
I don't
cycle
remember anyone
journey,
getting sick.
your cycle
Mm.
journeys are just amazing. I have to say, going through Xinjiang, and I hadn't realized until the last few years how beautiful Xinjiang is. That
Oh,
that
it's
somebody said,
amazing.
oh,
Yeah.
parts of it look like Switzerland.
Yep.
And it's just huge. It's got vast resources. You can see why the other lot would envy it and want to appropriate it. I
It's
mean,
also a
to
very important trade route. We're not just talking
yeah,
Silk Road here. We're talking
yes,
every train leaving China goes across there.
yeah. Do you know the train ended up embarking in 2017? I think it was that there was a train from China
To
that went
Barking.
all the way to Barking. I don't know how they got across the channel, how that worked, but
You
basically,
should tell our international viewers where Barking is. I know Steve Weaver will know, but
it's our old stomping ground.
yeah, it's the east end of London, effectively. It's east
That's where
side of
everything
London.
happens.
Yeah, it's
I
where
am
everything
from the
happened.
far east of London.
Yes, the Far East Hackney.
Yeah. But I
Yeah,
mean, that was amazing. So that was 2017. So that was during the so-called golden era,
yeah, I remember the golden
and
era.
this is what I'm saying. Everything got turned on like a tap. The minute they decided, oh, we're going to go for China, they started pouring. The character assassination started. It was just dreadful. But for me, the high point of our relations was that train arriving in Barking, and I
From
I would say,
Beijing to Barking.
I mean, I would have loved to have been on that train, either
Yeah.
direction. Being a poet in residence on that train, for example. I mean, that's my dream. That or being a panda nanny. Two things that I would love to
You
do.
can actually pay to be a panda nanny for the day, but I don't think that's really much of a goal. I think if you want to do it, you want to do it properly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a train. Trains fascinate me too. I've actually caught the train to Urumqi as well, back in about 2005 with my father, who's now 92 years old and
Oh,
won't be doing this again. But he and I and his partner and my wife's father and an auntie and a couple of friends, a large group of us traveled from Guangzhou to Xi'an. And Xi'an, for anybody who doesn't know where Xi'an is, it's the most incredible city. It has
yeah,
a beautiful
yeah.
wall around the outside, reconstructed, but still really well done. It has a Muslim quarter. It has one of the biggest mosques I've ever seen in my life. Massive Muslim quarter for fantastic food, great environment in that city. And we stopped there for a couple of nights, then jumped back on the train and went a further 26 hours to
Oh,
Urumqi.
love
Most
that.
incredible journey. Yeah.
I was
So,
in
and
Sin. I went to Xi'an in '74 with because you were asking about, had I been
yeah,
to China. So I went with my with my parents. So I was still a schoolgirl. 74 September. So it was September, October '74.
yeah.
And one day our translators, our guide said, "Oh, there's been something found near Xi'an. Some farmers dug up some stuff. Let's go and see it." And
Oh, you're kidding.
I remember being in the car. They took us, and I remember the mound, seeing the
Yep.
mound, and they took us to this place that a few months earlier, I think it was March, the first had been found. They'd thrown up like a big hanger over it, so they'd already started excavating it. But I remember sort of scaffolding poles around it, so you walked around the edge and then you looked down into the pits. So I was actually allowed at that time, because it was so soon after. So I was actually down in the pits playing with the terracotta warriors.
Trained soldiers. Wow, what a story. Now,
And
and amazingly, this is another thing that let me just come back to that, because you said that was 74. That was still during the Cultural Revolution.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
And they were protecting that in the Cultural Revolution. What does that tell you? It tells you that not everything you learn about the Cultural Revolution is true. I mean, Cultural
No,
Revolution was not a great time, but you were
their
here.
culture. It was the culture. Everyone was so. I remember the excitement about this, and you
Mm.
had, basically you had the intellectuals and piling in and looking at it. I didn't realize, because I was, young and stupid, I didn't realize quite how significant
The significance, yeah.
this was. And oh yeah, it's a tourist thing. Oh great. And then you realize after, and they were saying at the time, oh, we think there might be more. We're looking at other areas around there. And then gradually over the years you realize what this was that you've witnessed. So I feel very very lucky to have seen that. China's just amazing. I mean, there's how much stuff is there that they haven't found yet? There's, oh wow.
Chengdu has got several great museums. Sandoixing, I think. My wife loves them. She drags me around the museums, and I patiently go and take pictures. And I mean, I do enjoy, but my wife loves this kind of history. And when we come to China, we get told about 5,000 years of history, and we go, yeah, okay. But there really is more than 5,000 years of history. Those terracotta warriors are over 2,000 years old. But even before that, there's a lot of stuff in China that is older and definite evidence of civilization. Now, of course, it's not one country for that period of time. It's not like you can say it's an island and its borders never changed. It's changed considerably, but it does have, I mean, it has a written history. There's evidence of written history 5,000 years ago, or 7,000, I think, written on oracle bones and turtle shells and things like that, and dated to 7,000 years ago. So yeah, there's a huge. This is why Chinese people, I think, have much more patience than the West. In the West, we always want something done right now. Let's get this done. In China, they'll just say, "Oh, it'll happen. We'll wait," and they do have far more.
It's almost like it's an organic thing, letting time flow. Whereas I think in the West, it's like we have to change nature. We have to do battle with nature, man against the elements, and all that, instead of working with this stuff. And one of the great tragedies about this march to war that we have at the moment is, instead of working together and finding out all these amazing things that are still ready to be excavated and found out about this civilization for the whole of humanity, that's as important as the ancient Egyptian, the Sumerians, all around the Middle East,
Mesopotamia's, yeah.
In Africa, there's a whole load of stuff that we don't know about, that we're just getting glimpses of. And
we're losing it as well in Syria and Sudan. I mean,
do you remember Baghdad? Well, look at what was lost. With the Iraq War, they sent in what was it? The really ancient. They were basically ploughing up all these areas and making trenches that our archaeologists wanted to go through with a fine-tooth comb, that they had to work it out, and they said this has just been damaged irreparably, and this is our human history.
I think if aliens ever come to visit us, they'll look at us and go, what's wrong with them? Let's leave them. Let's take a wide berth and disappear from here. I can't imagine that any alien life force would be very interested in a planet that test nuclear bombs on itself, and then we're just stupid. We do stupid things, and we're constantly fighting. Why an alien race might come down and look at us and say, well, why are they all fighting each other? They don't need. But
why are we talking about nuclear war in this day and age? It's unbelievable that in the last 5 years it's become normalized, and I think that's part of the exercise, isn't it? To make it to make it acceptable. It's like, it's not acceptable. This is just not acceptable. Oh, I'm looking at your guitars on your back. I'm looking at your guitars. Are you?
Somebody asked me if I can play jazz, because apparently one of these is a jazz guitar for sure. But no.
Who plays the guitars in your house?
Sometimes I do, but I'm not an accomplished guitarist. I just happen to have. I had a friend here for several years who worked in a guitar factory. These are made in China. They're not Gibson guitars. They're Epiphone guitars. I do have a Gibson. It's just sitting behind me here. That's a genuine Gibson. But yeah, I can pick it up and strum, and I can do a little bit and piece, but you'd never get me on stage in a band. That's for sure.
Oh, you'll have to
I'd
do something
forget
with
it.
Barry, because Barry Weiss is a
Yeah,
guitarist.
yeah. I've actually been to Barry's apartment, and he's got a lovely guitar. Yeah,
Oh,
my wife and I, my wife is Anne as well, Anne, not Anna. But my wife and I took a cycling trip to Guangxi 2000 in the middle of COVID. This is another of the we weren't locked down. We took a 7-week bike ride through to and up to the border of a third province, and spent 7 weeks on the road in about 15 different cities,
oh, I
and
just
more than a dozen towns, and just rode through Guangxi and up to. We stopped in Guilin and caught up with Barry. We actually did a live feed from his bedroom together.
miss that.
That
I'd love
was
to have seen that.
Gosh, that's 2000, March 2019. Then we went up to the rice terraces in Longshan and Longji in the mountains, which are about another 100 kilometers north of Guilin. It's quite.
Greylin's just, I mean, that looks like something out of a fairy tale. Those great
It,
big
it,
teeth of limestone. It's
yes, it
beautiful.
is. But do you know what's really impressive about Guilin? The city itself. I never knew this. Everybody talks about going to Guilin, and Yangshuo, of course, is the spot where all of
Mm,
these cast stones are. They're all
mm,
over Guangxi, but there's an area where they are quite concentrated. And it is beautiful. We stayed in Yangshuo, but not in Yangshuo town is awful place, I think. It's full of tourists. But we stayed outside of the town, about 7 or 8 kilometers outside the town, which was great because if we wanted to go into the town, we just jump on the bikes without all of the gear. We stayed there on the way there and on the way back for 2 or 3 days each time. But Guilin city, Guilin
mm.
town, the city of Guilin is beautiful. I was completely surprised because no one had ever told me this. And I can remember we were walking around saying, why didn't anyone tell me about this? Why didn't I know this? Because
Is it
you know
beautiful
about
in an
ski.
beautiful old, or
Yeah,
beautiful new?
beautiful old and beautiful views too. But yeah, there's loads of old stuff there. The old university gate is still there, and there's loads of stuff to visit. If you like the culture, I've been to Chengdu. There aren't many places I haven't been to, but places that you think there's going to be good history here, and you go and see that. I was totally shocked because I had no idea that Guilin had this. It was really surprised me.
Hmm. I have to put that on
Hmm.
the list. I mean, I went there. That's one place we went years ago, but I
Well,
just
if
remember cormorants.
you would not like Yangshuo now.
Yeah,
You'd like outside Yangshuo. Don't go to Yangshuo town.
yeah.
Get outside. There are loads of beautiful places nestled in amongst those hills, and they've been opened up as bed and breakfast and hotels and stuff. Can you speak Chinese?
Petit peu.
And, and petit peu is the wrong language, but yeah, 一点点. Yeah. So, but if you it's much easier if you have a Chinese some skill. I mean, my wife is
Yeah.
Chinese, so there's no problems with that. She speaks Chinese, and we just find places. She's on her Chinese app saying, "Oh, this looks nice," and she shows me
Oh
pictures.
no,
Yeah, that's great.
absolutely no. You'd have to. Yes, you would
Go
have
there.
to know the lingo. And I've got my course, my course on my computer that I'm going to have to get into again. It's a
Mm.
shame. I mean, my dad did start talking to me in Chinese, but see, this was weird. I remember my mum's saying, I don't want her learning Chinese. I want her to grow up knowing English properly, and it's
What
oh
a pity.
no, it's definitely a pity. But when I'm in China, I start to pick it up.
I think you would. Yeah.
So
I've got a Taiwanese friend here. I haven't seen him for a few years, but when he came here, he tells me that he spoke not a word of Chinese when he came here. He grew up in America. He went to America when he was 4, grew up in Texas, came over here, and when I saw him a year or two later, I met him when he'd only been in China a year or two, and he was pretty fluent to me. I'm functional. I wouldn't describe myself as conversant, but I'm functional. I can get a taxi, get food, get directions. I can get along. I have what I call taxi Chinese.
I
If I'm
had
in a journey, go
ordering Chinese food. Chinese. That was
on. When you come over here, that doesn't work at all. Promise you, none of the food is safe.
what am I gonna do?
No, I can get in a taxi and have the driver say, "Oh, where'd you come from? How long have you been here? Are you married? You got kids?" All of that kind of thing. That's very easy. We can do all of that. And then he starts to ask me what I think about the state of the political situation. Timbudong. I don't understand that. So yeah, I'm pretty functional, but I have to. I'm going to do another master's degree next year. I'm hoping to. And in order to do that, I need to get an HSK level, which is the level of Common European Frame of Reference, the CEFR, and it has to get to a certain level. It's not high level, but I'm going to have to do that in order to get into the course. The course is in English, but that's what I want to do next year.
Another master's. How many have you got?
Just one. It's not that big. Not that big a deal. I did one while I was here. I'm one of those very strange breeds of people who happens to be, I consider myself intelligent enough, but badly educated. I left school at 15 without a qualification, and then joined the police at 18, got qualifications, went to live in Australia at 28, and then had to go to college when I was 28 because I had to get something. And that's when I started my formal education when I was 28. I got my first master's degree when I was, my only master's degree when I was 55, which I think is pretty good.
Yeah, there is hope for us.
Yeah, anyone can do it. Just got to have the time and, of course, the money.
Yeah. Earning a living, which we're all finding increasingly difficult in Britain. You know, well, I think you're in the right location. You're in the right place for having a good life. It's just, it's not a pretty sight here, and I'm disappointed that in the local. You all right, Jerry?
Yeah, I've got a bit of a cough. Believe it or not, 2 different waters, and one of them's causing me a problem.
It's gone down your windpipe.
I think so.
Yeah, you are lucky being there, because it's incredible, isn't it? Because, you know, China and the West are just going opposite directions. They're just crossing over now, and it just feels like birth pains that we're going through. I'm just hoping that Americans and Brits, you know, just come to their senses and just stop this war madness. It's just not a healthy way to be for them as well. It's not just that you're trying to, this is like a conspiracy to mass murder, you know, people who are living thousands of miles away. What is this doing to your soul? And I just don't think
that's also true. But I think in this case, if America is involved in a war, this will be the first one where America will be involved in the war. China has the ability to strike at the heart of America.
I know.
Now, why would anybody even consider that when you know that your opponent has this ability? They have hypersonics.
Because haven't you seen their luxury bunkers? I think the elite, the 0.1%, think that they're going to sail off into the sunset. You know, you got Peter Thiel with his luxury bunker in New Zealand. They all. I
wrote an article about that not that long ago, about how New Zealand is the only country that's not affected by this, or not very affected by this, and the reason is because the elites have all got homes and bunkers there.
Yeah,
that's what they're doing. They're building homes and bunkers and it's not just Peter Thiel. Many people have bought property in New Zealand, and there's a company in America that you can invest in this company in America, and you can have yourself an underground apartment.
And there was talk decades ago that the Queen and the family were going to be whisked off to Canada if anything looked like blowing up. But remember, you've got Boris Johnson's father, who was saying there are too many of us living in Britain. There should only be 10 to 15 million people living in Britain. And it's like, what happened to the rest of us then? I think you've got mad eugenicists in charge of everything. They think,
Malthusians.
we're going to save the planet for us, and and the rest of you can go fry. And this is a very unhealthy situation we have developing here. And
Yes.
I would like to see more grown-ups, more intelligent people actually taking this on and
Mm.
trying to stop it instead of ushering it in. It's What do you think of James Cleverly? What he's just said?
I just did an analysis on video of his presentation to the Lord Mayor's banquet, Mansion House presentation, and I felt that he started very well. In the first 3 minutes, he only insulted China once. And then it all fell apart. And then I thought, well, what's happened now is, of course, China has sent as its representative to the coronation this guy that people like Benedict Rogers can't stand. But of course, he didn't get an invitation. That's probably why, because he was involved in Hong Kong. He was part of this CPC's response to the situation in Hong Kong. And so the truth about Hong Kong is that China has done nothing at all, nothing that it didn't agree to do back in the Margaret Thatcher and the Deng Xiaoping era. It's done everything that it said it would do, and it's done more than it said it would do. And Xi Jinping just recently, I think it was the 25th anniversary, said that there is no reason to say that the two systems won't continue after the 50 years are up because it works so well. So China's very happy with it. Hong Kong people seem very happy with it. So I wonder what.
But it was always omitted, the final 6 words, except for foreign and defence affairs. That was always the agreement, that they would have autonomy, except in foreign and defence affairs. Well, this is what you've got, and they were supposed to have had a national security law, way before now. Anyway, so that's another thing. It's another thing that gets twisted by the media and our favourites, the BBC. Do you know, when I started making programs for the BBC, I can't tell you how proud I was. It was there was one point you could get an education just from the BBC. It was such a high standard, and although it was always the state corporation, there was always enough space for other voices to be heard. Right. But of course, I suppose now that the state feels threatened, it feels it's got to close down and just close up every single opening, which is a shame. But so sorry, back to Cleverly. Did you not, was that not an optimistic moment that he was saying we can't just write off China, that we have to still talk to them?
In a sense, yes, there was a sense of optimism. But what I saw, the way he portrayed that optimism was terribly badly done, very insensitive. He talked about Mao's famine, for example, where somewhere between 30 and 50 million people died. Mao took some responsibility for that, but he didn't cause the floods the year before, and he didn't cause the drought the year it happened, and he didn't cause the embargoes that America put on food coming into China. Somebody's put up a question here that I wanted to put up for you. I thought this is an interesting one. Of all the independent podcasters brave enough to tell the truth, who are you both most inspired and most respect, and why? Well, for me, I'm talking to one of the people that I'm inspired and respect. So that's one thing I can say. I have been absolutely amazed since I first saw you on Twitter. I didn't know you before Twitter, I have to be honest. Now I'm so lucky I'm talking to Anna Chen.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be. I mean, obviously when, I've basically been alone. I felt like a lone voice for a long time. So when you guys started to turn up after Hong Kong was when I noticed the first few, because before that, I was writing about the Trump trade wars, and before that, going back various other things. So it felt very much that I was on my own, and it was just weird looking around and not seeing anybody else. And then you guys started to turn up, and I felt, oh wow, reinforcements. It's like the cavalry's arrived.
Well, I'm happy to be an NCO in your army.
no, it was so important to hear, and also the fact that you'd actually been to Xinjiang as well.
Mm.
You've done those, the fabulous cycle ride. I think that's one of the first things I knew that you'd done.
That's how I started. I was just posting pictures of the ride, and then people were saying to me, "But you can't go to Xinjiang." Yeah, I can. Well, you must have seen the concentration camps. No, what are you talking about here? And it was then that I started to get involved. I had no political aspirations, no geopolitical sense. For the first year or so, I didn't touch Hong Kong, Tibet, or Taiwan. I only spoke about what I knew. Now I'm researched and I'm more confident about that. So I can say with some degree of confidence what's happening in Hong Kong, what's happening in Taiwan in relation to Taiwan, and what's happening in relation to Tibet. So, yeah, Xinjiang for me was just like, this is bread and butter stuff. I've been there. You can't criticize the guy who's actually been on the ground. Now, I didn't go as a tourist, so that was the reason I was. Many people say, well, you couldn't have seen it. You just get guided tours of the tourist spots. No, I actually cycled more than 5,000 kilometers through the province, or through the region. It's not a province. Anyway, who is your inspiration?
I don't know. I remember Tom Fowdy was around early. He was
Tom's
around
good,
early. Of the current lot, I don't know. I mean, Pilger was good in that he made that film, The Coming War on China, in 2016.
I just watched the Pilger interview with London Yahoo. I can't remember his name. The guy who used to be with SBS in London Yahoo, something like that. He interviewed John Pilger. And John Pilger made a really interesting comment. He said when he started in Fleet Street back in the 60s, they had space and room for the Mavericks. And even though they were doing everything right, and I think you just said the same thing, arriving in the BBC, very proud of what you were doing, there was still space for that Maverick. As long as they did the job ethically and properly, there was still space. And Fleet Street had that all the way through the 60s and 70s. And he said, it's gone now. Everybody needs to keep their job.
No, it's totally closed down. So, I mean, as you know, I've been excluded by podcasters, so it's very difficult to say that I can admire people who've actually gone along with the anti-Chinese bias. So
we've got a few of them on. I'm not sure if Fernando is still here, but Fernando is Furmubi, or China teacher.
Oh yeah, no,
he's currently in Xinjiang, towing his 23-foot caravan, as we would call it. He calls it an RV trailer. He's in Xinjiang right now, posting stuff. Daniel Dumbrell is a brilliant analytical guy.
But you have to remember, Daniel's blocked me. There are others who want to talk to me.
Why.
There's hostilities. Well, it's funny, isn't it, that the one consistent voice, Chinese voice from Britain, has been erased, has been blocked. Hostilities have broken out, and I think it's a real shame. I think that a lot of the podcasters aren't intellectually up to looking at the bigger issues. They're good at mechanically, like lawyers, questioning factual matters. That's good. That's part of it. But there's also this, you have to step back and look at how this dynamic is working. Because how is it that the image of Chinese collapsed so quickly? Yeah, there's a reason for this, and you have to look at it, because if you're going to try and get people on board to stop hostilities against China, you have to humanize Chinese people. If you're dehumanizing Chinese people by keeping them out of the picture, like blocking someone and not even explaining why, not having a discussion, but making sure that Chinese faces and Chinese voices aren't part of this discussion, then you are part of the problem.
The block may be something different, and if something happens to cause these people to block you, then there's an issue there. But the block may be something different. There is an app that you can download. There's a fee. It's a fee for this app, and if you have someone who is particularly obnoxious, you can block that person and all of their followers. I don't do this. I've never used this app. I will look at an obnoxious person's
Hmm.
followers, and I will block some of them
That's not
preemptively.
what happened, though. That's
Okay,
not
but
what happened, Jerry.
okay.
That's not what
So I
happened.
wasn't sure.
That's
That's a
not what
pity.
happened,
Thing.
right?
Okay.
There's a problem when it's a white rescue thing as well. I mean, I think everyone has to link arms and we have to help each other because we know that there is this march to war.
Yes.
But what I've also seen is there is still the desire for supremacy, and um, and it's very hurtful because he's not the only one. It is a phenomenon. It is a dynamic that is there, very deeply embedded in the collective psyche.
Mm.
And people have to be able to confront that and look at it. Where is it coming from?
Yeah.
Because if there is this wholesale erasure of Chinese people who've been saying this stuff for a long time, and we're not even allowed into the debate, then something has gone wrong. You
Mm.
know, we know that there is a residual self doubt thing that a lot of Chinese have, right? Steve,
Mm.
yeah, I've just seen your Steve's absolutely right.
Yeah.
So what's happening is that the Chinese diaspora are being presented as some sort of traitors, that we're not capable of withstanding the pressures on us in the West to be able to stand up and talk about this stuff honestly. And I think that's really important, because what you're doing otherwise is you're presenting the Chinese as somehow being inadequate and inferior because we don't have a conscience. We can't speak about these things.
Mm.
And if you keep on going on about the Gordons and the Vickies and the Selinas, but you don't mention that there are other people who are
On
the
the right
opposite,
side. Yeah.
then what you're doing is you are perpetuating this. And it's almost as if you're saying, we'll rescue you. You know,
Mm.
we non-Chinese, we're the ones who'll come in and rescue you. And a lot of people are latecomers who've come late to the argument.
Me. Yeah.
And it's, yeah, but we've always been able to communicate, Jerry, right from the start. Every now and again, there are a few people who every now and again there's a like, oh, I've got to do this blind. It's not sunny.
Yeah.
So every now and again,
It was giving you a rather interesting shadow.
um, so you know, some of you every now and again I'll get a little wave, and it's like a way of saying hi. It's a way of saying, oh,
Mm.
you know, we see you. We're with you. And there are others I've been on comment threads. And to start with, as you know, everyone who came along who was saying this stuff, I was retweeting, I was doing likes, I was making sure it got far and wide. And for a while there was a golden age, you know, when this was reciprocal. And then suddenly you find that you're on a comment thread, people are actually talking around you, they won't do a like, they won't acknowledge you're there. And it's like, don't you see you're doing exactly the same at this micro level that's happening at the macro
Mm.
level? You're dehumanizing us and presenting diaspora Chinese as and somehow it's in the Chinese spirit that we can't be trusted outside China. You're saying that we're all Gordons and Vickies, and we're quite clearly not.
No, you're not. Of course not. It does strike me as strange, and I'm very conscious. The things that you've just said have highlighted something I was conscious of. I feel quite often CGTN will invite me on to make comments, and this is great that they invite me on to make comments. But I'm a
Mm.
token white face now. What this is doing, there are millions of Chinese people who have far more experience than me, but they don't get believed. And I think
Mm.
CGTN and Global Times and the likes of them, they say, well, let's get this guy on because he seems believable. Okay,
Mm.
I seem believable. But the people who don't believe you, are the same people who don't believe me. And there's no convincing of them. And the people who do believe me say, well, why does it take a foreigner to do this? And I have that problem myself. And I can remember once being asked to go onto CGTN and saying, yes, but I don't want to talk about Xinjiang. Oh, that's why we
Mm,
want to invite you on. And I said, well, I don't want to do that. I did it last week. I did it the week before. I don't want to keep being in that position. There is
mm,
nothing new that I can add to this conversation. Let's talk about my experience in China. Let's talk about my bike riding. Let's talk about
mm,
anything but Xinjiang. And I've done that a couple of times to people. And I'm very happy to come on your show. But
mm.
please, can we not talk about Xinjiang? Because I've done it to death this week
Yeah.
or last week.
You see,
And that is a problem.
I'm so pleased, when people turned up, and you need everybody on board. It has
Mm,
to be multiracial. It has to be from different backgrounds, because otherwise you're saying there's something genetic in it. There is a genetic superiority, super or something. So it's very dangerous to let these ideas set like concrete. And anyone
mm,
who is reinforcing that inferiority, in 1860s California, the Chinese who were imported to build the railroads were regarded as celestials. They're regarded highly. Then gradually you saw this corrosive thing happen to their standing in California, until it got to the 1870s, when there was
mm,
an economic downturn, and you had demagogues like Dennis Kearney in California who would get up and scapegoat the Chinese. You had lynchings happen. You got to a point where it took 10 Chinamen to equal the voice of one white. And
mm.
I feel that
That was actually a legal position, wasn't it, at one stage?
we've entered the same territory now.
Mm, yeah. There
But I'm
was,
glad you are. I listen. I am absolutely so grateful that you are talking about these things. But the idea that it can only be a white face doing, or non-Chinese face, I think brings with it a whole load of problems that they're
yes.
not thinking about. I've written
Yeah.
about this. I keep writing about where this comes from. It is so deeply embedded. You have to challenge it.
Mm, yeah. Yeah. I was talking to someone today in Guangdong television and said, I'm going to be chatting with Anna Chen tonight. And they said, well, who's Anna Chen? I said, you need to know. And I sent a link. So you're probably getting a new follower tonight. I sent a link to your Twitter feed, but yeah, and I described you as being the first person I came across who was aware of the anti-China sentiment. This is the most important part of my relationship with you. When we first started, you were coming out with things from a long time ago, and I said, well, I didn't know that. I didn't see that. I was living in China, and I didn't even see this. My life changed not when I came to China, but probably 3 or 4 years later, maybe even longer. Before I did my first bike ride, I realized that what I knew about China was wrong. The bike ride probably consolidated a lot, but I was already in that position of being a convert, if you like.
Mm.
Certainly, I had my road to Damascus at some stage, but I can't pin it down and say this is when it happened. I came here and hated it. I really wanted to go home, and I
Oh,
had a contract. Oh, it was just I lived alone. I had no friends. I was working in a school. They picked me up and took me to the school. At 5 o'clock, they took me home again. And from 5 o'clock until the next morning when I went to school, I spoke to no
yeah.
one.
Mm.
I went to restaurants here and tried to order food because I didn't speak any Chinese at that time. Tried to order food and they just laughed and giggled and I
Mm.
just lost all my confidence.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very, very difficult to communicate when you're in that position. I've traveled all around the world. I've never been in a place where nobody can speak English. You can always get by when you're English, and
Yeah.
you can't here. Well, now you can, but then there was no such thing as digital translators or anything like that. It was just trial and error. I found a restaurant finally that had pictures on the wall, and I ate there 7 days a week. That, that was really how I started to change. I started to learn what's the name of this one. I like the look of this one. I didn't like the taste of it, so we won't have that this time, next time. And that was how I got to learn the names of some of the foods that I like. And that was it. Once I started doing that, it started to change. And my contract was coming to an end, and I said, I don't want to go home. That was really
Oh,
how it happened. I wasn't
well,
ready to go home.
that sounds like a very hard period. That does sound like
It
very
was pretty
miserable.
hard. I mean, I look back on it now, and it wasn't as well. Now the memories are not so bad. I've still got friends from that era, that period of time when I was working in a school. It's 11 kilometers from the city center. The school is still there. I haven't been back to work. I mean, I've been back in there a couple of times, but I stopped teaching in 2013. I stopped teaching altogether. So people still call me a teacher in China. I haven't been a teacher. I'm a corporate trainer. I'm a teacher trainer. I train teachers how to teach. And I'm actually retired. I can't legally work here. But when I do work, it's usually for a foreign company that asks me to do something here. And I can do that's legal. It's as long as they don't pay me in RMB, it's legal.
Uh-huh.
So they can pay me in
It
whatever
still
currency they
sounds
like.
like it sounds like you've got an amazing lifestyle there.
Oh,
Probably
indeed.
better
Yeah. Yeah.
than we have here.
Yes.
I know, honestly, I've got lifestyle in for you guys. You know, I hear from, you know, like Mario, who's there. There are various people. And Barry, you know, when he plays his guitar and you see the view out of his windows, and
Yeah, he's lucky where he lives.
do
I
you know
have to be honest.
he made a video that actually made me cry. It was during COVID, and he showed a video. He's just walking through a park, and there were families, and it just looked civilized. And I didn't realize how, you know, because this stuff sometimes builds up inside you, and you don't realize until something triggers it.
Mm.
And I saw this video where it looked normal, people living normally, and here it was, you know, we're in the middle of lockdown. Just everything, you just feel that the ruling class is chowing down on you here.
Yeah.
And I thought that,
The
well,
lockdowns here were not lockdowns. We weren't locked down.
yeah.
That's a fact. I
But
had
no, Wuhan, what was though, wasn't it? The first one in Wuhan.
Wuhan was, and you know, I'm talking about during COVID. So towards the end of COVID, there were lockdowns in various different places, but they were surgical lockdowns. Shanghai was a mistake. They
Yeah.
screwed up Shanghai. There's no doubt about that. But we traveled. I mean, I during that, I think I calculated we were at least 40 different cities during the period from our first lockdown to the end of COVID. My wife and I had traveled to 40 different cities in several provinces. We went to Sichuan. We went to the museums. It was normal life. The lockdowns that you experienced, we had when it first started. We had a lockdown. I was allowed out of the house every second day for 3 hours. Go shopping, come back. But what happened was some of my friends were also allowed out. We'd meet and have a couple of beers, and then we'd come back, and without shopping, of course. So it was all done legitimately. My wife was unlucky, but she's quite happy. She's a stay-at-home person, and she just likes sitting at home and reading her books and communicating with her friends. So there's no problem with that. We were okay.
That sounds right. No, but it's the fact that there's like this social breakdown going on here. It's like it's just sort of the unpleasantness that you don't have. There's more social cohesion there than there is.
Yeah, there is. I mean, well, it's communal. It's communist country. The reason communism works, and it's not true communism either. I've written about that and made a video about that. It's not true communism. But the reason communism works is because people feel communal. The reason it will never work in the United States, why the United States wants to prevent communism from creeping in, it amazes me, because it won't work there. They're too individualistic. And England is the same. I got this question: do I miss England? Whew. The answer is I miss my father. I adore my father now. I mean, when I was growing up, I didn't have that same feeling. But he's a lovely old guy now. And if anyone sees my WeChat page, it's a picture of me and my dad with a Guinness each. And he's now 92, and he's housebound now, so I want to get back there soon and see him. I've got a couple of brothers. I've got 4 brothers, and 3 of them live in the UK, 1 in Australia. So I do want to get back and see my family again before it gets too late. But yeah, do I miss England? Not really. I don't miss the weather
I miss
at all.
Cornwall. I do miss
Oh yeah,
Cornwall.
Cornwall's nice.
I,
Yeah,
I, because I started going there when I was 10,
yeah, that was
and
artistic, wasn't it?
I,
You were down in
yeah,
the arts. Yeah,
it's yeah, and
yeah,
St Ives and places like that. That's
yeah.
just beautiful. And of course that was always much nicer. You'd get to St Ives and it was like, oh, everything melted, all the stress melted away.
Mm.
So that I miss.
Yeah, one of my brothers lived in Devon for a little while in a place which sounded like it came out of an Agatha Christie book. He lived in Ottery St Mary, and I always thought, what a strange name for a place. But it's famous for its tar barrel runs. They put a burning barrel of tar on their backs and run up the street.
Sounds like Darwin Award.
Yeah, yes. In some cases, it is. We were there a few years ago. My wife and I were traveling there, and we were there for the the tar barrels, Ottery tar barrels, and they said that it might be the last year they do it because they're having a lot of trouble getting insurance. It's hardly a
Yeah.
surprise. You've got a burning barrel of tar on your back, and you're running up the street, and tar's spitting out of it at the
Mm.
pedestrians and spectators standing at the side of the road getting hit by pieces of burning tar in the face.
Do you ever
So,
miss food like roasts? Because I think the food that the British do really well are
mm.
Sunday roasts and breakfasts, full English.
I do miss breakfasts. We can get. I do. I've got a barbecue here, and I'll roast a lamb or a leg of lamb, or not a lamb. It's not that big. I'll roast a leg of lamb or a side of pork or something. Yeah,
Mm.
quite often do that here, and often invite my. We've got quite a large, not a large, there's a small foreign community here, and invite a few friends around. Um, oh, this is nice. I like this comment. My show's getting better and better. I love the Zoom like this. Okay, well, we're just chatting, aren't we? I do. I don't miss the roast because we can get them. I've just found a supplier in the last 3 or 4 months for my favorite thing, Bovril, which
Ah,
the vegetarians out there will be cringing. Oh my God, I love Bovril. And I found a supplier of English Bovril in China. So that's great. It's a little expensive, but it's worth it. I had a pork pie and Branston pickle with cheese for
oh,
my lunch
oh,
today.
yes.
And
I love
uh,
Branston and pork pies.
the what was his name? Gav, who was on a little while ago. His wife makes the most amazing pies, and she has a business, Juliet's Kitchen, in China. So if anyone's in China, look up Juliet's Kitchen online. His wife makes the most amazing English pies, and then she'll do things like chili con carne and soups and stuff like that, all frozen and delivered anywhere in China within pretty much 24
Home
hours,
from home,
sometimes
then.
36. Mm.
Home from
But,
home.
yeah, Gav Munro, who came on a little while ago with a comment, his wife Juliet is Juliet's Kitchen, and there's a little plug for Juliet's Kitchen. The pity I don't have 10 million viewers, and I can earn some money now. Or this is one I do not like, but I know people who do.
I like it. Me.
Oh, sorry. Now, I can eat haggis, neeps and teeps and
Yeah.
things like that,
Mhm.
but I don't like black pudding. Uh,
If you don't think about what it is, that it's basically you're eating scabs.
oh,
It's
so- well, I mean, I don't eat it anyway. But if I could find it here, I mean, I could probably find it here. I'm sure if I go looking far enough. But if I found it here, I would tell my brother-in-law. There's a little story I'll tell you about my wife's family. She has the most unique family, possibly in the world, but definitely in China. Her mother and father have 3 daughters. She's the middle, and we got married first. But before we got married, we introduced her younger sister to a friend of mine, and they got married. So now they have 2 daughters, both married to Australians.
oh
And then about 3 years ago, the older daughter, who was got married before, divorced, has a son, and was at home, fell in love with my best friend here, and they're now married. So, and he's Australian too. So, three local Chinese daughters, all three married to Australian husbands. And the other thing about us is none of us are pure Australian. I'm British born, became Australian. Mike, the older one, British born, became Australian. And Dave, the younger one, is Australian born, Italian citizen because his father was an Italian. And he grew up in Italy, but he was born in Australia.
And do you
So
have
what an
children?
interesting, yeah,
Are,
they
are,
have
are
children. I don't have children, not here. I have, I had two children. I lost one. My daughter is on the Gold Coast now in Australia. And during COVID, actually, we lost our son. So that was
I'm
pretty
sorry.
tough. Yeah. No, we knew it was coming. I saw him. He was diagnosed with cancer, and I saw him before he passed. But for the last 6 or 8 months of his life, I couldn't see him. And we had to watch his funeral online. That's a pretty tough thing to do.
No, that
So
is
when
that.
people say, "Oh, I had a tough time during lockdown," I say, "No, you didn't."
Mm,
I'll tell you what a tough time is if you want to know.
yeah.
But anyway, moving on from that, my Italian brother-in-law who lives in Australia with 3 children now. So they all, when they lived here, they all spoke Cantonese and Mandarin. Now they don't. They just speak Australian. Mum speaks Cantonese to them. They answer in Australian. That's English, by the way.
So are there many? There must be a generation of mixed kids who are.
Yeah, there's a lot of mixed kids. I mean, I've got friends who have children here. Most of the friends that we have are not mixed or European. Zhongshan, the city I live in, is a very small community of foreigners. Not that many of us, and I don't know all of them, but if there's any British here, I would know of them. There's a few, and I know some of them, of course. But there's not that many foreigners. So most of our friends are Chinese couples with Chinese kids. But we're all getting a bit old now, so the kids are off their hands, and we can all do stuff together. It's nice. My wife's almost as old as me. She keeps reminding me. She's not. She's
But you sound very happy.
16 years, 16 years younger. Someone asked this question. Now, maybe you can answer this question.
That's one of the few things that I don't get on with. It's very difficult to get the. It's just weird because it depends on the flavoring that you.
Yeah.
Anyway, I have to say I'm not a tripe-eater. Black pudding, yes. Kidneys, yes. And I know not a lot of people like kidneys. You can't get kidneys here. That's the other thing. In the past few years, it's like all the butchers have closed. All the offal that you used to be able to get that nobody wanted to get cheap. But I love kidneys.
I love liver.
To get lamb's liver, you can get, and a bit of pig's liver, but to get all these things. Oxtail has suddenly shot up in price. That used to be a really cheap cut. Scrag end of lamb, the neck of lamb that I make a great stew with. I haven't had that for like 2 years.
This is the brother-in-law. Is way past his bedtime, but yeah, he just lives around the corner. This is actually the brother-in-law, the older one.
I just realised it's about 2 o'clock where you are now.
Yeah, it is. It's 2:05, but I don't care. I'm having a great time here.
Time flies.
Here you go. This could be a future appointment for you. Christy Franklin is a lovely lady.
Hi, Christy.
In Jackson in the USA, one of the Jacksons in the USA, and she and I have had a few chats online like this. But yeah, you should have a chat with her.
Yeah, it must be difficult for Americans actually to
Americans who form an opinion. An American who forms an opinion that their news is not correct is subject to all kinds of problems.
I can imagine. So is it the blue pill or the red pill that makes you see the truth? It's like everyone around us in the West, they've taken the wrong one, and it's like every now and again you get someone like Christy or myself even, who takes the right one because you want to keep seeing. You don't want to feel that you're being manipulated.
Yeah, it's true. And I'm not sure what pill I took, but I probably took little parts of the pill over a period of time.
Mm.
Somebody's asking, can I show a video? What is Zhongshan famous for? Now, I'm going to ask you, Anna, as a Chinese heritage person, do you know
Mm.
what Zhongshan is famous for?
I don't know what.
Ooh, you should. Have you heard of Sun Zhongshan or Sun Yat-sen?
Oh gosh, yeah.
That's him. He was born here. Sun Yat-sen was the first president of China. Not as many of my former students used to think Mao Zedong was the first president of China. Sun Yat-sen was the first
Yeah.
president of China. He was the
Where's he
leader of.
buried? I've been up all those steps to where to his
Oh,
mausoleum.
he's buried
That's
in
not
Nanjing. That's no,
right.
that's more than 1,000 kilometers away from here.
Mm.
He died in Beijing, buried in Nanjing, but born here in Zhongshan. We're
Right.
about 60, 70 kilometers as the crow flies from Macau, on the same side of the river,
Oh, right.
opposite to Hong Kong.
So you're
So
quite
if you,
south. So
yeah,
you're
yeah,
quite
yeah,
south. So your
yeah.
weather. So you can't probably can't remember what it's like to be freezing cold.
Oh
And we've
yeah, I
had like
can.
one of
I
the
can.
longest
I've
winters.
been I've been to Beijing and Harbin and Xinjiang, a few places that are freezing cold. But yeah, I here it doesn't get bitterly cold. I mean, there was one day in living history where it actually can't say snow, it sleeted for a day, and that happened. Can I do a video? The city's not all that beautiful, but I can certainly take some pictures of it and make a little talk over. I'll do that for you, Seymour.
Yeah,
But
I'd
it's
like to
famous.
see. I'd like to
Okay,
see.
it's a very part of it's very modern. I live up a. In fact, I've done this. I've put videos of my bike rides through the alleys where I live on YouTube, but I've got two channels, and the other one is they're both channels on the same account. The other one I've stopped using, but it has some of the old videos that I did riding around with a camera in my hand like this.
Mm.
So they're not very clear, but yeah. So Steve says, make it happen. Okay. Yeah. So somebody else said this. Zhongshan, Sun Zhongshan, the father of modern China. Yes,
Mm.
he was born, grew up here, and went to Hawaii for education, and then I think he was in France for education. He lived in Japan for a period of time. He was basically in exile, self-exile, until 19 early 1900s, and then came back with the revolutionary people who took over from the Qing dynasty, and
Mm.
he was the leader of the Kuomintang at that
It's
time.
usually Paris, isn't it? It's usually Paris that they get like Chow and Lai.
Yeah, Deng Xiaoping, Zhou Enlai, and I think Sun Yat-sen was in Paris too, and Ho Chi Minh, who's not Chinese, of course, but yeah, it's interesting, that one. Okay, so I've got to go down here. I'm just trying to look to see Moses. Well, I don't know where this history comes from. It's a possibility.
But he was
I'm,
better than the Qing dynasty.
Yeah, and certainly the foundations that were laid at that time, probably not the next 20 or 30 years until the Japanese invasion, but the foundations that were laid at the time were pretty good foundations for what we've got now, and I think probably most of what we have now can be attributed to Mao's dogma, Mao's stubbornness to stick with what he was going to do instead of capitulating to other people's ideas. And what we have is, I think, what he might have envisaged if he was still alive. I think he'd be quite pleased. So the the Freemasons wanted to overthrow the Qing dynasty because of opium. Now, this is a really interesting comment. Do you mean that the Freemasons wanted to bring back opium, or because the Qing dynasty hadn't controlled it well enough. What an interesting comment.
And is that
I
Chinese Freemasons or Western Freemasons?
I think probably Western Freemasons, if you
Hmm.
think about it. Yeah. Anyway, though, I think we should probably think about stopping here. We're now
You need
2
your
hours and
sleep. Yeah, quarter past
yeah.
2 where you are. It's quarter past
What's
7 here in the evening.
It's a little late for beauty sleep for me, Anna, but I
Never.
do probably need to go to bed. I actually had a night out with some friends last night and got to bed late and then had to get up early. I still teach one student, and it's the daughter of a government official, and I can't stop. It's the only student. She graduates next year from high school. She's the only student I still teach. I had to get
Oh.
up to teach her at 9 o'clock this morning.
Well,
So,
it's really lovely, meeting you
and
in
you
the flesh
too.
across
Thank
the
you.
airwaves for the first,
Yeah.
at last, like
Yes.
this.
Now,
And
the
thank
most important thing for anybody who's watching who doesn't know, where can they find you? You've got the blog, you've got the Madam Meow on the, but just tell us where can they
Twitter.
find you?
I mean, basically, if they find me on Twitter, so they can get to my Twitter, through you, I
Yeah.
guess. And then it's in the bio at the top, my Madam Meow website, which has basically got everything from 2007 and before, some writing before that
Right.
as well.
Yeah.
So thank you for
Another thing that I would strongly recommend people do, I would strongly recommend people go and watch a couple of your poetry videos. They're great. Your poems are, I mean, sometimes they're just like shockingly funny. How did he get to that? It's really clever, really clever. So do anybody who's watching this who doesn't know, so Anna, do you have a YouTube channel?
I do, yes. And in fact, if you go onto my Twitter, there's one of my poems, the Eating Placenta, my royal poem, at the top. If you follow that, that will take you to the YouTube channel, and then there's more
Poetry is
on there.
very good.
I am going to be doing some talks on various things. Like, for example, in 1994-3, I started a book called Coolie about the Chinese who worked on the California Railway, the Central Pacific Railway. At one point, I was saying this is taking me longer to write than it did for the guys to build the Transcontinental Railway. But it's gone way past that now. So what I will probably do is turn some of these things into talks and post them. So that's the sort of thing I'll be doing. So thank you, Jerry. Hopefully, we can do this again. It's been absolutely lovely to.
Love to do it again. Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, critical thinking. Keep it happening.
Yes, please. I agree. That's why I just put that one up before we finish. This one is good. Anna is lovely. Yes. And critical thinking. Please, everybody. And fortunately, we get. I don't get that big of an audience yet, certainly not at this time of night. A lot of my audience are Chinese, so they're probably well in bed, except for Mike, my brother-in-law, who's still there. But I don't get that big an audience, but what I do get is 5,000 or 6,000 views, so it is worth mentioning these things. Yeah, it's not huge, but it's building all the time. And this is the thing that keeps me going is almost every day I find somewhere between 20 and 50 new followers on my Twitter account. Went crazy a while ago. It went up to 80,000, but this is new. My YouTube is new. So it is kind of developing. The best poetry and comedy comes from internal suffering. Would you agree with that?
It can do, or it can. You can get the opposite where you can't escape the suffering. You have to be outside the suffering in order to, I think, technically write a good poem.
See in it, yeah.
So yes, I know what you mean. You have to touch on those extremes, but also I think the best humour can come from, I don't know, just having a wry observation of the world. So suffering is good, but don't get stuck there.
Okay.
No, suffering is not good. Suffering can be rather useful if you know how to use it, but just don't get stuck in it.
I used to say that all experience is good experience, even the bad ones. Roger is watching from Melbourne, which is 2 hours. Roger, you must be on night shift or something. Nobody in their right mind would be up watching this channel at 4
Oh,
o'clock
that
in the
must
morning.
be, what's that, 5 or 6 a.m.?
I think 4 o'clock maybe. Yeah.
A fellow insomniac, Roger.
Yes, yeah. Oh, Christian is also 4 a.m. there. So it does show we've got some great fans coming in. So thank you, everybody, for watching. And I am now going to end this broadcast, which takes about 10 seconds. So
Bye-bye.
thank you, everybody, for watching.